Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 15. I have Tim joining us for the Interludes, along with Paul and Eliot as normal. Tim, how are you?
I am doing quite well, thank you.
Good. Paul, do you have your 2 words?
I do. I have them right here. My 2 words for the interludes in this chapter were unleashed and questioning.
Unleashed and questioning. Okay. Eliot, what are your 2 words?
So for this episode, I have discipline and cursed.
Discipline, cursed, unleashed, and questioning. Was that your second one? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let's discuss these.
I bet I can explain where your words came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, go ahead. Try to guess Paul's words if you can.
Yeah, so unleashed and questioning. Unleashed, it's obviously Szeth. Just, man, he goes ham. Ugh. And questioning, it's Ilan and his father. And especially with Dalinar, just questioning himself. Like, am I doing the right thing? Do I need to sit down? Do I need to not?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's what those were for. The only other thing I thought about with questioning actually was in one of the other interludes with Baxel. I mean, it was kind of a brief moment about asking a question if you want to get killed and stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it wasn't a major thing. Yeah, that was with Dalinar was the main reason for questioning.
Okay. Eliot, what were your 2 words? I can try to guess yours.
Okay, I had discipline and cursed.
So cursed. It's probably a combination of Szeth and Dalinar. Dalinar doesn't know if he's cursed, and Szeth certainly thinks he's cursed because he has to kill all of these people and he really doesn't want to. And sorry, I don't remember what was the other word was.
Discipline.
Discipline. It's not Bax. Doesn't have to do with Baxel. Doesn't have to do with Geranid. Geranid?
Or does it?
It might. I mean,
It's Haranted. Thank you very much.
Haranted. Yeah.
Geranid.
Geranid.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook, by the way.
It's been a while since I listened to that episode, that chapter actually. I would assume it has to do with Dalinar as well. That's my guess.
You're mostly on point. The cursed certainly with Szeth and him believing himself to be cursed. Dalinar, he thinks he's cursed. And then this new information we're getting about the old magic and the boon and the curse, which I want to talk about. And then discipline, definitely Dalinar. Dalinar shows some very impressive self-discipline and self-control at the end of this section. But then discipline, I kind of tied into the other interludes a little bit as well. In the Baxel interlude, interlude 7, the mistress shows a lot of discipline as she doesn't steal anything. She's just wrecking everything for whatever reason. And then slightly tied it into the Ardents, the old Ardent couple episode, and that they talk about how they're kind of off on their own. They're isolated, but they're still disciplined in pursuing their arts. They're not just kind of like letting their lives go to laziness. They're still being disciplined to try and chase after what they're studying. So I thought that was interesting.
Nice. All right, let's stop for a spell check. It's been a couple weeks since we had a spell check, but we only have one this week, and that is the King of Yakaved. Eliot, can you try to tell us how you would say his name?
I can try. lot of syllables here, but hopefully I can do this one. I'm going to go for it. It's King Hanavanar. Hanavanar.
Okay, that is how they say it in the audiobook. Paul, would you
Yes.
like to spell this?
I would. I actually feel pretty confident with this one. I don't usually feel super confident in my spelling, but I have Hanavar.
You got it.
No hesitation.
Yep, let's
Nice.
go.
It's almost a perfect palindrome. It's just an R instead of an H at the end there, and King Hanavanar.
Perfect.
Boom.
Good work. Okay, without any ado, let's just jump into the Interlude 7 with Baxel. Any first impressions, Eliot and Paul, before Tim reveals what's actually happening here?
This was classic interlude for me, where I'm just kind of scratching my head the whole time, going, "What is going on?" And the mistress seems very important. She seems very powerful, but I have no context to tell me why or how or anything like that. And then we get the interesting discussion about the old magic, which I want to talk about, but I didn't honestly pick up too much out of this. I'm sure there's a lot here, but this was one where I was pretty confused most of the time.
I always love the interludes, and I always love how we are kind of just dropped into this new little environment and have no clue what's going on. And that definitely happened with this one. We hear about the mistress, and I thought it was pretty fascinating because the mistress seems extremely seems super powerful, and you don't know anything of why she's powerful, but she seems really devious, almost like we hear from Baxel. And part of my weird questioning was, he asks like, why what's happening. He doesn't even know what's happening, and he's working for the mistress, I guess. And I guess his coworker was like, well, you could ask if you want to die. And I don't know, like, I don't know. It's so, super mysterious and weird, and this mistress lady seems really strong and powerful. Casually mentioning, maybe I should get a shard blade or something. She's crazy. I don't know what's going on here at all, but I think it's cool.
So, for the first time reader on this interlude, all you're really supposed to pick up on is the first mention of the old magic. They give you a little explanation of how the old magic works. You request a boon, you get what the Night Watcher deems you deserve, and then you get a curse to go along with it. And that's really all you're supposed to learn, because Dalinar, you learn in the next chapter, in the next actual chapter, that Dalinar has gone to seek the old magic. So that's kind of the only purpose for the interludes, for this interlude, for first time readers. But Tim, do you have any tidbits for us as an experienced Cosmere reader?
Yeah. First, I want to say, with all of these interludes, they're slow burners. And so there's things for the first reader, there's things for the multiple time reader of that book, and then there's things for once you've read multiple books coming back. And so I'm sure I don't know everything yet, because not all the books are out. But something that I found interesting, a connection I made this time, that I've made some other times as well, is that at the very beginning of this book, on page 9, Szeth, in the prologue, when he's walking down the hallway in Kholinar, he notes that one of the statues is missing. And like that's weird, because Gavilar was a devout Vorin man, and so he would naturally have all the statues there. And so that was interesting. Just like wondering to myself, maybe these are connected, and if so, how long has this lady, the mistress, been doing this? And then, yeah, my only other thing was just the casual mention of a shard blade, as well as you'll notice sometimes that people have there are distinctive physical features of people from different areas in Roshar. And so it always sticks out to me when it says something like in this chapter that she had shin eyes, but she was dark like a Makabaki. And it's just
but tall like
interesting,
an Alethi.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so you're just wondering, like, okay, what happened here? Like, what's going on?
So this isn't the first time we've met someone in an interlude that doesn't match a traditional body set from a specific country. Back in the Ishik interlude, the foreigners that came to visit Ishik didn't know where they were from. They didn't have any matching, like their eye shape was wrong. I don't remember what the specifics of them, but he couldn't place them. He didn't know where they were from. They spoke a weird language. So you're supposed to start seeing that not everyone fits into this mold of this person's Azish, this person's from Baba Tharnum, this one person's from the Pure Lake, that type of thing.
On her description, I did note that her eyes were described as so light that they were almost white. And it may not be important, but I'm going to come back to that at the end of this chapter.
Okay.
End of this episode.
I'm looking forward to that. Elliot always has great predictions.
Well,
This isn't a prediction. This is more of just a moment.
I can press you a little bit on it right now. Do you guys have any predictions on who the mistress is? And that might the eye color might play into that, Elliot.
Yeah, to answer your question, I don't know. I really don't know. Her casual mention of a Shardblade makes me think that she's really powerful. Like, she just kind of offhand mentions, oh, maybe I should go get myself one of those. Like, so far we've learned that it's a pretty monumental effort to try and get a Shardblade. You have to take down a Shardbearer to do that. So is she just casually capable of doing this? Or I don't know. I'm confused here. I really don't know. The one tie-in that I do have, you're forcing me to spoil my tie-in here, is later on in the Dalinar chapter, when he's encountering the Knights Radiant. One of the Radiants is described with a similar eye color, if you will. He's described as his eyes are so light that they're almost white. And so I don't know quite what to do with that. They just kind of, both of those kind of seem to stand out to me. I guess I would just conclude that maybe that person, the knight and the mistress, come from the same place, but I have no idea what that place would be. So I don't know. I'm lost.
That actually gets me thinking, because I never thought of that comparison there, but obviously the mistress is someone who's very powerful, and it's if getting a shard blade is like a second hand, like maybe I could get one, maybe not, might as well. If she's not concerned with it, that means she's probably been around a long time and probably powerful. Maybe she's like a fallen, like radiant or something like that, because she seems very like has very like malicious intent. And we've even spoken, we're learning a little bit about the old magic, so maybe she's part of that like curse part of that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think she's some kind of like major figure that like fell into darkness. But that's as good of a prediction as I can do.
I mean, in other interludes, we've met characters that have lived a long time before. Do you guys remember his name?
Axes the Collector.
Axes the Collector, right? He lives a long time, so but yeah, you're right. Maybe she has been around a long time. All right. Any thoughts on Baxel, or should we move on?
I'm good. Let's talk about Haranted. That's how you say it.
Okay. Haranted with a G.
Yes, I expected that to be one of the words, not gonna lie, but I assumed you couldn't because it's the title, so I would have known how to spell it, which I would have definitely gotten wrong.
Is that really how you say it? Are you joking? Because I would have gotten that completely wrong.
That was not a joke.
Huh.
I was as soon as I heard it, I was like, "That's gotta be a spell check word," but you can't because it's the title of the chapter. But it was Haranted. Like
Right.
I listened to it
Wow.
less than 3 hours ago.
I usually do both listening and reading during both weeks, but I just did the reading this time, so I didn't remember how to say that. So I'm glad you're here, Paul.
I
Haranted,
definitely
okay.
listened to that earlier today and still heard Haranted.
It's I
Not that they said that, just I heard
Mhm.
that.
I would promise Haranted.
Any
Anyway.
first impressions on this interlude? I'll start with Paul.
So honestly, as far as the interludes have gone, I've always been super enticed, and I felt like this one may have been the most boring, I guess, because which is fine. It wasn't actually boring, but like in comparison to me,
It's okay for it to be boring. You don't have to sugarcoat it.
true, but it didn't carry on too long. It was pretty short. Um, but I was really interested in they mentioned Shadesmar, and I've
Yes.
honestly kind of been really curious about that, and I feel like that was the biggest intrigue from this interlude. So we see these like I don't know exactly what they are. I guess they are some like scholars. Like one of them works in chemistry and but like with food, does a lot of cooking and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was slightly confused about these people's like what they do. Honestly, slightly confused. But it seemed like a lot of philosophical questions, like what was it? Talking about like food for the mind and like how that would be, and
Mm-hmm.
they mentioned shades more in that, and I was really confused but curious because they specifically mentioned Shadesmar as a place that would be possible.
Right.
So I don't know if I can get any information on that or not.
So they're both Ardents, and they're just studying. They're obviously studying Spren in this chapter, but they're not your normal Ardents because they obviously have a relationship here. They call each other dearest, and he kisses her on the forehead. There's a relationship here, and Ardents aren't supposed to be in relationships like that. So there's something off here, but we don't know really what it is. And then they start talking about the cognitive realm, the spiritual realm, and the physical realm. Um. So, yeah. Any thoughts, Elliot?
Yeah, a few. I noted the relationship between the two of them, and that definitely caught my eye because I thought, like you said, that Ardents weren't supposed to be in relationships, and I kind of got the impression this is like an old married couple, basically, that have been together for a long, long time. And I couldn't help but think that is this what Shalon and Cabsol could have been if they'd, run off together and then, gone off and hidden and just, continued studying random stuff. Would they have ended up being this couple who's, you know, joking around and making food for each other and whatever they're doing? That is a super cute, funny old couple. I did also note the physical realm versus the spiritual realm versus the cognitive realm and how those were mentioned specifically. And the cognitive realm is mentioned in conjunction with what you're talking about, Paul, Shadesmar. And that caught my eye immediately because that is the name of the chapter where we had all the Shalon shenanigans going down. So that crazy mind trippy chapter where we learn Shalon has a shard blade, she goes off into this other world, she soul casts, all of that. The title of that chapter is Shadesmar. And that chapter didn't explain that at all. But now I'm starting to think, well, hold on a second. Is Shadesmar the cognitive realm? And did Shalon visit this cognitive realm, Shadesmar, in that chapter? I'm beginning to think so.
I did
Well,
not
let me
remember
just
that
jump in
that
here.
was
Go.
called Shadesmar. Sorry,
Go
Tim.
for it, Tim.
Yeah, no, you're good. I honestly, I didn't know that either. Good, thank you for pointing that out. You noticed a lot of things. Yeah, as for what I can tell you right now, you're gonna learn more, and you're gonna learn more pretty quickly. The end of the book is coming up pretty quickly, and so you're gonna learn more. But really, this is just an introduction to those ideas and those words. So when they show up more, you're like, wait a second, I've seen that. Where is that?
Yeah, I didn't pick up on anything else to actually learn about the cognitive realm or Shadesmar, or if I'm even drawing the right connection there, that the cognitive realm is Shadesmar, but at least I have a name to look out for as we keep on reading. So I'm encouraged that you say more is coming, hopefully in this book and not 4 books down the line.
Yeah.
True. I'm excited to learn more about that, especially now realizing that we briefly saw that with the Shalon chapters, whenever they got super, super crazy. And I'll say, like, these interludes did introduce us to some stuff, but as far as the interludes have gone, in my opinion, these ones weren't as exciting. But the last interlude here definitely made up for that. Definitely took this from like a 2 out of 10 on excitement to a 10 out of 10. The Szeth chapter was definitely one to write home about. It was pretty incredible, and I absolutely loved it. The chapter was
So what was great about it? Talk to me.
So one of my words was unleashed, right?
Yeah.
So we get to see Szeth. It's kind of like it's a really like emotional chapter, right? Because we know Szeth that someone bad has his oath stone, and so he's been sent to kill a whole group of people at a dinner, and then so we know that he doesn't want to kill these people, right? But he does it because of his oath.
Correct.
And so I was impressed with, like, genuinely very impressed with the writing and how descriptive the action was. Like, I was really on edge, like, just listening to it. But then we get this moment where Szeth really actually gets mad and he gets a justification for what he's doing. There's a conversation with the king, and he finds out that this was partly a trap. And so he is the king now to blame for the deaths of the innocent people there. And so Szeth completely goes off. He absorbs so much Stormlight that he, like, it says it's like really trying to escape from him. And so it's so easy for him to force that out because he absorbed so much that he's like forcing it out. And it even specifies that he let go of his shard blade, and it's completely specified that he didn't need it because he was the real weapon. And I thought that was so sick. And there's so much, like, Szeth is just like an absolute monster. I don't even understand how strong he is. It whenever he speaks with the king and asks who he is, he just says death. And I was like, really? Believe you. I totally believe you. And it was just incredibly well written and incredibly, like, action packed that it was really crazy.
So something I want to highlight with these 3 interludes is Brandon Sanderson is really good at both world building and piquing your interest with world building and action writing. He is really good with both. Like the previous chapter, it's 2 Ardens sitting next to each other talking about the spiritual realm and the cognitive realm, and that piqued my interest on my first read of, wait, what are we talking about? I don't understand what's happening here. I want to know what's happening with these spren. Why is the spren not changing? And then the very next chapter, Brandon Sanderson writes like this: another group came at Szeth from the side, and he drew Stormlight into his hand and flung it in a full lashing across the floor at their feet. This was the lashing that bonded objects. When the men crossed it, their shoes stuck to the floor. They tripped and found their hands and bodies lashed to the floor as well. Szeth stepped through them mournfully, striking. The king edged away as if to round the chamber and escape. Szeth sprayed a table's top with a full lashing, then infused the entire thing with a basic lashing as well, pointed at the doorway. The table flipped into the air and crashed against the exit. the side bearing the full lashing sticking it to the wall. People tried to pry it out of the way, but that only made them bunch up as Szeth waded into them, shard blades sweeping.
I specifically remember hearing that quote while I was listening and instantly just being on another level of listening. Like I was listening and then I was like, oh my gosh, like that writing is incredible. And I couldn't put the book down, so to speak,
Right.
It was super engaging.
With those two paragraphs specifically, Brandon Sanderson is doing three things. He's world building because you're learning about lashings as they're happening. He's character developing because you're learning about Szeth and how disconnected he is from his actions here. He's so cold and stone-faced about this that he was crying earlier, but he's run out of tears at this point, and he's not even processing what he's doing. He's just walking through them and killing people. And the third one is it's very engaging action writing. Like, you understand the physics of what's happening here as you're learning about lashings, and it's really engaging, as you said, Paul. So those two paragraphs specifically I really like because Brandon Sanderson does so many things with so few words.
I also thought about that a lot with specifically that table moment where he effectively throws the table to block an exit. Because what we know about Szeth is he's not happy that he's doing this, right? He is in a state of mourning where he doesn't want to do this, but that is such an advanced maneuver to trap the people in and kill them. And you'd feel like he would not do that and just be like, oops, maybe some people ran away.
Right.
But he was set to do that, and he is doing that to his peak capability. And I don't understand that. I'll be completely honest. I mean, I understand his oath, right? His oath stone, and that he abides by that. But to the wholehearted extent that he's doing it is baffling to me.
Right. He's very committed to following his orders because his orders for this one were kill like you've never killed before. And so he's going to do that because that's what he's been told to do.
I felt like this one was a little bit different with Szeth too, because one of you guys already mentioned, Paul, I think it was you, that Szeth switches a little bit in the middle of this when when he realizes that the king tried to lay a trap for him. And he says, basically, oh, you done it now. Now you've given me a reason to hate you. And Szeth goes from kind of holding something back and being mournful to being angry and just letting all this anger, all this frustration, all this anger and frustration mostly with himself, but he's channeling that now into the destruction, which unleash was a good word, Paul, for this one, because he really unleashes the true Szeth here, and it's Szeth on another level.
He fights 3 shard bearers without even a shard blade himself. He hand-to-hand combats all 3 of them.
Yeah, it's a mind-blowing chapter for sure. And I kind of walked away from this chapter kind of wondering though, Szeth is clearly such a skilled warrior. It makes a point of, Paul, I think you said this already too, that he doesn't even need his shard blade, like you're just saying, Trevor. He can just take these guys on barehanded. He even mentioned some kind of martial arts that he's proficient in or something like that.
Yeah.
But that kind of makes me wonder, how did he get so good at this? If his background is Shin and comes from the land of Shinovar, we've been there before in one of the previous interludes, and we learned that they're entirely peaceful, or at least mostly peaceful, where warriors are the lowest caste and violence is looked down upon and all this kind of stuff. Where along the road did Szeth pick up all of this skill? What happened to him that he's trained so much to be able to do this? I'm getting a lot more curious about Szeth's history now, the more we see.
That is definitely my number one question. Because I think Szeth is so awesome, but mostly because I'm curious about his past. I'm curious about how what's this oath stone? Like, what's that all about? And how did he get to be? How did he become deaf? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly.
There's so much crazy stuff about him. And it's just kind of like kind of casually dropped in here in these interludes in the prologue. I mean, I guess it's not that casual. Like, it's making a very Brandon. I can tell that Brandon Sanderson made very like deliberate points to showcase Szeth and all these things, but like it's he's still my number one like concern in what I want to know about.
I love how I asked this question, and both of our experienced readers immediately reached their bookshelves for a book. Clearly, they know something.
So
And now I'm even more
I
curious.
was trying to find the specific sentence where it says the martial art that he uses, because I remember it saying that it's designed to be passive, that the martial art he's using is designed to be non-lethal, but in the hands of Szeth with his lashings and his Stormlight, it becomes more lethal than a shard blade. So it's twisted. Szeth is twisting what could be a beautiful martial art of like incapacitating someone as opposed to killing them, right? And he's turning it into a more deadly weapon than has ever been seen before.
I see that. I see how that works.
But I couldn't find the thing on the fly, so I just had to paraphrase.
I had it. It's the ancient martial art of Kamar.
All right, so here's my question for everyone: who would win in a fight, Szeth or the Mistress?
Mm.
They seem to both be able to casually take down shard bears, even though like we don't actually know about the Mistress. That's way more ambiguous. But
Well, she doesn't have a shard blade, so I would say Szeth, because Szeth could just go. Whoosh.
true.
Tim.
How?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the shard blade is a big advantage, and we don't really know at this point what can she do. I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say it may be an unfair question for y'all if y'all know a lot more.
You were trying to bait some spoilers, but I'm not gonna bite, so it's fine.
You're like, yeah, sure,
Uh,
Szeth. Yeah, he has a shard blade.
Yeah, I'd love to bite. Not yet.
Okay.
Before we leave this Szeth chapter, I do just got to say that this whole time we were experiencing this scene with Szeth, all I kept thinking too was that scene from Star Wars Rogue One, the movie where Darth Vader shows up at the end of that movie and is just laying waste to the rebels, and just how they're completely helpless to do anything to defend against him because he's on another level.
Right.
Sorry for the spoilers if anyone has not seen Rogue One, go watch that movie. It's the best Star Wars out there.
It is the best Star Wars out there.
But just that feeling that I got, that little pit in my stomach of watching that scene of Vader just wading through the helpless rebels, you know, slaying them left and right. That's the exact thing that's happening here. Szeth is just effortlessly laying waste to this entire army that's been, you know, set in place to try and capture him. And it's almost like he doesn't even have to try. Against the Shard Bears, he has to try, but against the rest of them, it's just effortless for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they mention Dalinar keeps on mentioning that a shard bearer by themselves are essentially an army, and then I guess this is a pretty good transition if you're right with that into the next part.
Yep.
Yeah, like a shard bearer is an army to themselves. Like Szeth has got these strange powers, this surge binding, and like we don't even really know the extent of what he could do. We're starting to see that.
Yeah, I really loved seeing the different like yeah, the different like ways he could use his powers. Like my personal favorite was the partial lashing upward, where he just made himself lighter. Effectively, he lashed like 1/4 of him up, and the rest was down. And I thought that was super cool. Some almost anti-gravity stuff going on. So
I thought that was super clever too. That was probably my favorite magical power there as well. And I had to scratch my head at that section too because it was like it describes it as he lashed 1/4 of his weight upwards, therefore he was half as heavy. And I had to read that again because I was like, wait a second. Oh yeah, that does make sense. If 1/4 is pulling up and 3/4 pulling down, then you're half your weight, which would allow you to do a lot of really cool acrobatics that you wouldn't normally be able to do. It's a smart use of that.
Which, okay, this is a complete aside, but like, I wonder when I read that, like, okay, what does this mean for his muscles? If he was constantly feeding on Stormlight and constantly at half his weight, will his muscles get weaker? If he trains while being lashed to the floor, is it like working with weights? That kind of, I don't know. Some cool thoughts with that.
lash yourself upwards, and you're like, it's like taking the weights off, right?
Yeah.
Szeth never needs to go to the gym. He's just always got weights with him. He just lashes himself down a little bit. Resistance training.
Yeah, exactly.
Elliot, you mentioned the math on 1/4 lashing up would equal half as heavy, and on my first read through of the Way of Kings, I thought it was a misprint because I was like,
Yep.
no, that's not right. Like that's not how math works.
Some really
Lashing
fun
math.
stuff. Yeah, honestly.
Takes me back to physics class.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't lash out at me.
Yes.
All right. Any closing thoughts on Szeth before we get into Feverstone Keep and the Radiance?
I really hope we have another Szeth moment before, like, for the next set of interludes, or maybe if there's like a little ending thing. I imagine there's maybe like one more thing about Szeth before the book ends, but I don't know if we'll really see that much of him.
Unless we
here on
get that showdown that you're asking for.
True. I'm kind of doubting that will happen in this book, at least. But I'm still sticking to that. I still think we're gonna have a Szeth Kaladin interaction.
If this helps your prediction anymore, remember that he just trashed the capital, the king of Yakoved. This is not just some lord in some manor somewhere. This is probably the second most powerful person on Roshar, second to Elokar, as when it comes to hierarchy of kingdoms. Yakoved is the second largest kingdom, has the second most shards. This is the king of Yakoved, and he just killed him and his entire court basically without really trying.
Word of this is definitely going to get to the Shattered Plains and the High Princes in Elokar. There's no way they're not going to hear about this.
Right.
It's kind of big.
All right. Now, to start part 4 of The Way of Kings, I want to read you guys how Brandon Sanderson starts part 4, because it's one of my favorite dialogue pieces in like the entire book. And it just the comedy in these few lines are so funny to me. These are the very first words of chapter 52. Father, Adolin said, pacing in Dalinar's sitting room, this is insane. That is appropriate, Dalinar replied dryly, as, it appears, I am as well. I never claimed you were insane. Actually, Renan noted, I believe that you did. I can just imagine the little brother, standing off to the side, and Renar's just like, actually, I believe you did. And Adolin's like, well, I might have, but I didn't mean it. Like, it's such a funny, family, father, son, little brother thing going on here. I love that dialogue so much.
I thought that was good too. That was a fun little interaction there that you can totally see that being acted out. You can totally hear those voices and the inflection and tone in there. That you don't even have to describe the kind of banter that's going on there. You can just it leaps off the page.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, this was such a good chapter, I think, to, I guess, be our final chapter for this episode, right? It's the first chapter, part 4, but we see a lot. We see a whole lot. And I honestly, like, we see this, I guess, like, with that the cute little moment with Renarin, and then there's a whole scene of Dalinar's vision into the Day of Recreance. And I specifically remember listening to this. I listened to that vision, and then I was like, what? And so I just had to re-listen because I was pretty lost, and I honestly, so much happened, and I didn't know what to think. We got, I feel like I just got introduced to so many like major details that I was like, this is incredibly important, but I don't know how yet. But this is like really, really incredibly important.
Right.
Um,
Elliot, if you were looking for Feverstone Keep on your map, you're not going to find it.
I was, as we started reading this chapter, Paul, I had the exact same feeling of there's a lot of important information here in this chapter. I have a feeling I'm going to be flipping back to this chapter in the future to learn some things, because there's not enough here for me to piece together a whole lot, but I think it's telling me more than I think it is. And yes, the very first myth or the very first mystery that I'm trying to solve is, where are they in this vision? And the only clue we get is that it's winter, or that it's very cold where they're at. And we've seen a lot of places in Roshar now. I was actually thinking, with all the interludes that we've been to quite a few places across Roshar now, with different scenes that we've seen. But most of them, if not all of them, seem to be very warm places. They're deserts, or they're tropical islands, or they're Alethkar or Shattered Plains. We don't get a lot of places that are described as cold, so I don't really know. There's kind of, Trevor, I think you've mentioned before that Roshar is clearly in the southern hemisphere of its planet, and that the northern portions of Roshar are the warmer ones, closer to the equator, and the southern portions are closer to the poles, and so colder. So my only conclusion would be that we're somewhere in the southern half of Roshar, maybe kind of the southeast corner, south of the Shattered Plains is one of the few places we haven't been, although I think Kharbranth is down there ish. So yeah, I was trying to piece that out, but I couldn't find any clues.
Kharbranth is down there, and directly south of the Shattered Plains is called the Frostlands. So
Yeah,
maybe that's where we are. You mentioned
that's my only guess.
You mentioned the cold, and I wanted to highlight this part because this stuck out to me on my read through this time. I didn't catch it the last however many times I've read this book. And Dalinar describes the vision as, the air was cold enough that clumps of ice clung to the stone. And that made me think that I always think of Roshar as always like wet. There's always puddles everywhere. Like the rocks are always wet, and like, because high storms, once every 4 or 5 days, whatever. But this made me think of how miserable a cold high storm would be. Like, I really enjoy thunderstorms. I really enjoy sitting in the rain, but an ice high storm there's just ice just sitting on the stone from the last ice storm. That would be terrible to be stuck out in.
It's like those pictures you see sometimes of like icicles going sideways,
right?
Like off of something like that. That's what I envision too. That's what an ice high storm produces, is those like sideways icicles, because the wind was so crazy.
Right.
Yeah, I specifically remember it talking about the cold, and that it had been cold for a long time. I
Yep.
imagine I don't know this, actually, never thought about it, but I imagine they have seasons. We know at least that there's the weeping, which is kind of a season. But maybe there's temperature differences. but at least where they're at, it's cold for an extended amount of time, which seemed very unusual to Dalinar. And
So
we do know, as far as I know, this is in the past. So I'm wondering if it's
Mhm.
was very different in the past. Like different weather climates.
That's an interesting thought.
what Dalinar notes is that they said 40 days of winter, and Dalinar thinks that's a long time. So
Mhm.
Roshar is very fast with its cycles. In a year, between like 1,000-day weepings, there's 1,000 days between weepings. In a year, that there's so many seasons. It goes from summer to winter to spring to fall, and Adolin has noted in the past that it's not predictable. That there will be a high storm, and then you're in 3 weeks of spring, and then there'll be a high storm, and then you're thrown into winter for 2 weeks, and then there'll be another high storm, and then you're in summer for 2 weeks. So being stuck in winter for 40 full days is surprising to Dalinar.
Something I just noticed. 8 weeks is what he says. 8 weeks equals 40 days. So there's 5 days in a week for Roshar. And that's about when the high storms come around. So that makes sense. It's about a week between high storms. And so they say that seasons usually last for not more than 2 to 3 weeks normally. So it's like every time a high storm comes, the weather could change. Still trying to figure out all the implications of that, because like that literally just occurred to me.
So we know that this is like a different place in a different time, obviously. So there's a lot of unknown. Elliot mentioned that this is a chapter that he'll likely have to flip back to, and that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I can't wait until like later on when Elliot's like, remember that chapter? This is what happened there, and now we know what that is, or and stuff. And I specifically was really excited to hear Elliot's thoughts on these events and what was going on. We see about the Day of Recreance, and that's been mentioned before, right? I had assumed it had been mentioned. It sounded familiar to me, but I didn't remember what was significant about that. I didn't know if y'all remembered that. I know Dalinar, what we learned from his vision at least, it seemed to be the day that I guess the Knights Radiant like kind of abandoned. They kind of abandoned their posts, so to speak, and gave up their shard blades and a lot of stuff that I really didn't understand why or what's going on here. And honestly, this is one of the chapters that's just like, here's a ton of questions we'll probably find out a year from now. I don't know. Yeah.
Before Tim gives you some information, Elliot, what are your thoughts?
I enjoyed this chapter quite a bit for the hints, the tease for what's coming later, because I want to know so much more about the Knights Radiant, and we get a little bit here. The first thing I noticed was we mentioned before that shard bearers are their own army. Well, Dalinar looks out over the ramparts of this keep and sees 200 shard bearers marching towards the keep or something like that, and just how that blows his mind. He even does like some mental math and thinks, oh, in all of Roshar today, there's maybe 100 shard blades, total in the entire world, and here's 200 right here in front of me. This is crazy. So definitely on another scale. And then we got an interesting mention in this chapter about orders. It was mentioned about the orders of knights and how they mentioned two of the orders, but then he says, but there were 10 orders. What of the other 8? That has me intrigued. Of Are those like different subdivisions of the Knights Radiant? Are these different factions? I was curious about that, but yeah, like you said, Paul, a lot of questions.
All right, Tim, what do you
All
got?
right, I am just checking about what shows up in the index at the end of the book.
Do you need me to fill for something?
So I would love for you to fill for something.
Sure. So I can talk about Dalinar in this vision because Dalinar is very commanding in nature and person, and he just can't help himself. When he sees one of his fellow guardsmen nodding off, he chides them real quick and is like, "Hey, stop nodding off. Stay alert." And they all kind of look at him like, "What? Like, what? Aren't you supposed to be asleep? What are you doing? Like, this from you? Like." So they don't see him as Dalinar, obviously. Was that long enough, Tim?
Yes. So I'll tell you what I can. First of all, there's more to come. Read and find out. Brandon Sanderson's favorite answer to questions is read and find out. But like the basic order of the Knights Radiant, was that there were 10 orders, and at this point, like we don't know much more than that. But obviously, something made them different.
And he notices that the Stone Wards are all in brown, and the Windrunners are all in blue. So
yeah, and I can refer you back to the chapter with Sigzil, where he tells you a little bit more about the Knights Radiant. And he said they all have the same first ideal, and then their ideals were different for the other 5 or other 4. There's 5 total for each order of Knights Radiant. Now we don't know necessarily what that means or what the implications are of that, but like they're different orders. They have different ideals. Ideals usually something you would live your life by.
And
so that's kind of the
going back to the colors, we've seen these 2 colors before in Dalinar's vision. So when he was fighting the Midnight Essence, there were 2 Knights Radiant that came and joined him to fight. One was blue, and one had eyes that glowed of amber, if you remember. And that knight healed Dalinar and his vision wife. I don't remember her name, but that knight healed Dalinar. So if amber is the same as brown, we've probably seen these same 2 knights of orders before.
Interesting. I did not piece those together. That's an interesting bit of information.
I did not either. I'm really curious to learn more about the Knights Radiant. I feel like that may be the biggest like historic like group that's super pressing, right? Like they seemed incredible and had these awesome powers, and they, I guess, all had shard blades, or at least a ton of them did. So I look forward to learning more about that. And honestly, as far as the Dalinar story goes, I think that's what that's the biggest thing we've learned, like biggest piece that gets me super invested in his story. We see a lot of awesome Dalinar moments, but kind of this in-depth, like, well, not super in-depth, these stories and these visions with the Knights Radiant, super intriguing. And I know Dalinar always mentions that like maybe he's gone mad, but I think us as the reader know that there's got to be something more significant. At least I think it would be kind of lame if later on it's like, oh yeah, these are just kind of like, he was crazy. He's a crazy man, you know.
Right.
So I'm pretty confident that these are important visions, and that the Knights Radiant, this is them, and this was the Day of Recreance, and this is some crazy stuff. And yeah, and then also my biggest question, or one of my biggest questions with this chapter, aside from just seeing the Day of Recreance, is with the old magic. We had that like introduced before. We saw that in the interlude. but we found out that Dalinar, I guess the first person we actually know, has a tie to it. It mentions that he seeked the old magic, and I was a little confused there, naturally. Um, but yeah, I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on that.
I was rather surprised to read that Dalinar has visited the Night Watcher and participated or gotten the old magic or whatever this is. Dalinar does not strike me as someone who would seek after that sort of thing. It seemed like from the interlude that we got with Baxel that this is kind of like your life is in ruins, you have nothing else, you go to the old magic to see if you can improve your fortunes kind of thing. It's something that someone who's very superstitious goes after, which Dalinar seems to be the opposite of that. So to hear that he's gone to the old magic was really surprising. But it shed some light on some stuff that, or maybe some potential light on some stuff that I've been very curious about. In the same breath, like the very following paragraph after the old magic, we get another paragraph about Dalinar's wife. And I don't know how much I've talked about this on this the main episodes for the podcast, but Dalinar cannot remember his wife and or his ex-wife, or we don't really know. And it seems to be maybe pointing that the old magic has something to do with that. Is that his curse that he can't remember his wife? Or is that his boon that he can't remember his wife? Like all of that seems to tie together, and I'm rather intrigued and surprised by that bit.
So you said that you're surprised that you didn't think Dalinar was the type of person to go looking for that type of thing.
Yeah.
However, if you remember back to the prologue, Dalinar is drunk, slumped in his chair. And we
Yeah.
have not seen Dalinar touch alcohol since. So
True.
back when Gavilar was the king of Alethkar, Dalinar was a very different person. We don't know who that person is, but he was certainly different back however many years ago. And so would today Dalinar go seeking the Night Watcher? You're right, probably not. But Dalinar hasn't always been like he is now. And we do know that much.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That's exactly what I was thinking. In that it even mentions yeah, like we've seen in the past that Sadeas and Dalinar and Gavilar and them, they were all kind of, they were all comrades, and they, as far as I know, Dalinar was a pretty standard normal man for most of the time. It liked the material things and stuff, and really became this more wholesome fanatic, I guess,
Mhm.
in his older age. So I would totally believe that, like in his younger years, especially since he seemed very highly revered as like an incredible warrior, the Blackthorn, right? Um, and I would totally believe that he would have sought it out when he
Right.
was younger.
The banter back and forth between Dalinar and Adolin after the vision sticks out to me in this chapter. I really enjoy it because Adolin is kind of like an immature brat in that he doesn't want Dalinar to step down because he doesn't want to be in charge. He doesn't want the responsibility of being High Prince, and that's the only reason why. And Adolin doesn't care that Dalinar is quite literally losing his mind over this. He just doesn't want to be High Prince. So he's suggesting anything and everything to get Dalinar to not step down. And Dalinar kind of loses his temper with him. He's just like, what do you want me to do? I cannot go on living like this and still be High Prince. I need help. And you are not helping me at all. And like that's such a cool moment that Dalinar is being so raw and genuine here, and Adolin just wants to sit at wine houses all day and court young ladies
And duel.
and duel.
I I thought that that was a really admirable sentiment from Dalinar from a leadership perspective. I think that his idea that he can't lead if he doesn't truly believe in himself. I think
Right.
that is really telling about how Dalinar goes about his leadership, in that he's he has powerful leadership skills because he's so genuine, because he's so honest, because he's so authentic, and he knows that if he tried to fake it, he would lose all of that. And I think that says a lot about it. Dalinar is very wise to know that is the secret sauce for his leadership model, and that he would lose that if he tried to fake it going forward.
And when he tries to explain that to Navani, as Navani is trying to start a relationship between them, spark something there, he kind of, I imagined it. He's kind of yelling at her a an explanation of why he can't go through with this, because if he calls the rest of the high princes out for not living up to an honor code, and then starts breaking the honor code for himself, he becomes something far worse than them. And that is really powerful phrase, because they're not even trying to live up to the honor codes, but if he tries to and fails, he thinks he's worse than they are. And that's a very interesting mindset to have, and I don't know if I agree.
So I think I definitely do agree with Dalinar, again coming at it from a leadership perspective. Dalinar is holding himself to a higher standard than he does everyone else, or at least he's chastising others for not holding themselves to a moral code, whereas he is holding himself to a moral code. And I think that that level of accountability and that level of discipline is necessary for someone who is in a leadership position. I think people that are put in a leadership position or take on that role should be held to a higher standard of honor and ethics and morals, because of the position that they're in over others. And so for Dalinar to hold himself to that, I think is very admirable of him from a leadership, him is in a place of authority over others kind of perspective.
The reason why I said I didn't necessarily agree, because the other high princes are in leadership roles. They're leading their own princedoms, but they're not even trying. They're just enjoying the casual richness of being a high prince and not taking any of the responsibility, or at least that's how Dalinar sees them.
Yeah.
And Dalinar's at least trying. He may not succeed in every point, but he thinks he would be worse if he settled for some of the codes and not others.
I tend to agree. If you're gonna set up a code and say I believe this, you should hold to it. Now I don't I think they've mentioned it so far that like that's just there's a difference between the codes and tradition. And this one's tradition. And so I can see it. I don't think um, it would necessarily be wrong in this case. But I definitely agree with you that if you're gonna claim to hold something as true and as good and want other people to follow it, then you yourself should definitely be at least attempting to follow it. Um, not that not that you're gonna be perfect, but that um, you're not saying, okay, well, I think all of this is right, but I only like this, so I'm only going to do this, or I don't like this, and so I'm not going to do that.
So we
Tim said everything that I was saying with way fewer words. Well done.
so we definitely see a lot about Dalinar, and I don't really mean to to go to a less serious note or a different note, but with the conversation with Navani, I don't understand it completely. I understand like why he was speaking with Navani and stuff, but maybe I was getting the wrong like interpretation from listening to the audiobook, but the ending conversation was very weird and uncomfortable.
Well, it's supposed to be, but what's your
I did
what's your
not like
question?
it.
What's your question?
Aren't they? They're related, right? Like
Not by blood. So
I thought by blood, so I
no.
was very uncomfortable.
Oh no.
No.
Navani
I was
married
I was at a misunderstanding.
Navani married Gavilar, who's Dalinar's brother.
Okay.
So
Slightly better.
so Dalinar certainly thinks views them as family, but Navani does not. Navani views herself as an eligible widow and him as an eligible bachelor.
Okay.
If that helped.
Sure. Yes, I did get that from Navani. I
Trust her
think I
also.
understood. I was trying to figure out why. Like, what's the point of this conversation? And maybe it shows why Dalinar doesn't like speaking with Navani. He maybe this has been kind of a recurring thing for the past week. I don't know. It seems like a weird, awkward situation. And so I didn't mean to like bring that back and end on it because honestly, I don't care to talk about it. But
Hey, the chapter ends on an awkward note, so maybe it's appropriate that we end the podcast episode on an awkward note.
true, I guess so. I was relieved to know that they aren't related by blood.
We're good. It's all good.
Because first,
Yeah.
my first remembrance was I thought of Navani as like we always knew she was like a family member, so I just assumed by blood. So that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, I find the dichotomy in Dalinar really interesting, where out of like kind of a recurring theme is that he doesn't really trust anyone, but out of all the people that he could have chosen, he trusts Navani, and so like there's an interesting level of there's so much trust put in here, like this could wreck him if it got out. That maybe he's going insane. Like, what's going on? That would be crazy, and people wouldn't know what to think. But he trusts her enough for this to do what is right for the princedom and for the nation. But he's got that personal level of I don't want to talk to you, and we don't really know why yet.
I'm glad you said something, Paul, so you're not just uncomfortable the entire time as these chapters go forward.
True. Yeah, I'm glad to get a little bit of clarification on that. It will definitely help my my listening to any other dialogue between them. So
All right, any closing thoughts on episode 15 as a whole, gentlemen?
I am mostly curious with the past. I'm curious about Szeth's past. I'm curious about now the Day of Recreance and the Knights Radiant and all things in the past. That's my big point of interest right now.
Okay.
Paul, as usual, we balance each other out well because I'm actually most intrigued for the future now. I'm excited to get back into Dalinar's storyline and figure out where he's going. Is he going to step down? Is Adolin going to step up? Where are we going with this? I feel like we've been on the Shattered Plains for a little while now, both with Kaladin and with Dalinar. I feel like something big is going to happen soon, and I really want to know what it's going to be.
Well, we are in part 4, so we're coming up on the end of the book fairly quickly. So something's coming.
It's coming to a head.
All right. Thank you for joining me, Tim, Paul and Eliot, and we shall reconvene next week.
Farewell.
Adios.
Tschüss.